Hong Kong, CNN, China's rubber stamp parliament has announced that a new national security law in Hong Kong will be on the agenda at its upcoming meeting, a move likely to fuel further anger and protests in the semi-autonomous city.
The law, which is expected to ban sedition, secession and subversion of the central government in Beijing, will be introduced through a rarely used constitutional method that could effectively bypass Hong Kong's legislature.
The move could enable Beijing to crack down on anti-government protests in Hong Kong and will raise further fears that the city's autonomy is being eroded just as demonstrations begin to resume following a lull due to the coronavirus pandemic.
Ahead of the annual National People's Congress (NPC) meeting, which starts Friday, spokesman Zhang Yesui announced that this year's session would review a proposal titled, Establishment and Improvement of the Legal System and Implementation Mechanism for the Safeguarding of National Security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region.
National security is the bedrock underpinning a country's stability. Safeguarding national security serves the fundamental interests of all Chinese people, including our HK compatriots, Zhang told a news conference in Beijing on Thursday.
He emphasized that Hong Kong is an inseparable part of China and, in light of new circumstances and need, it is highly necessary for the NPC to exercise its constitutional power to deliberate such a proposal, adding that further details would be revealed Friday.
The announcement came after a meeting of top Chinese officials with Hong Kong delegates to the NPC.
Article 23 of the Basic Law, Hong Kong's de facto constitution, calls on the local government to enact laws on its own to prohibit any act of treason, secession, sedition, subversion against the Central People's Government.
But almost 23 years after the former British colony was handed back to China, the law has never been passed. The last attempt in 2003 was met with what were then the largest ever protests in the city's history, and the legislation was shelved.
Beijing has long been frustrated by this failure, and has called for the legislation to be introduced. However, while subsequent Hong Kong administrations have spoken of a need to pass Article 23, it has never been put on the agenda, apparently for fear of the type of widespread unrest seen last year over a proposed extradition law with mainland China.
Those mass protests, which lasted over 6 months and grew increasingly violent and disruptive before the coronavirus pandemic drew them to a partial halt, were a major challenge to Beijing's control over the city. Following a closed-door meeting of China's top decision-making body late last year, an official communiqué spoke of the need to improve Hong Kong's legal system, which some saw as a reference to Article 23.
Dennis Kwok, a pro-democracy lawmaker from Hong Kong's legislative body, told CNN after hearing of the proposal, "It is the end of one country, two systems. Completely destroying Hong Kong.
This law will provide critical supply of oxygen to one country, two systems," an editorial by the state-run Global Times newspaper fired back Thursday. It will ensure forceful clampdown on evil foreign forces' interference in Hong Kong affairs and make extremist opposition forces in Hong Kong restrain their destructive behaviors.
According to local media, Hong Kong delegates to the NPC suggested to Beijing using Annex 3 of the Basic Law to effectively bypass the years-long gridlock over the anti-sedition legislation. Anything added to the annex must be introduced in Hong Kong by way of promulgation or legislation.
For Article 18 of the Basic Law, laws listed in Annex 3 shall be confined to those relating to defense and foreign affairs as well as other matters outside the limits of the autonomy of the region. Previous laws introduced in Hong Kong by law of Annex 3 include regulations regarding China's exclusive economic zone, which has an effect on territorial claims in the South China Sea, and legislation regarding foreign banks.
In recent years, the Chinese government has taken a broader view to Annex 3, and in 2017 it added a national anthem law to the list. The Hong Kong government said this month that the legislature will resume debate on that bill next week. The proposed law will make it a crime punishable by up to 3 years in prison to insult the national anthem.
That it has taken 3 years for the national anthem bill to receive a second reading indicates the type of delaying tactics and fierce opposition any attempt to introduce Article 23 via the legislature would bring. However, the Basic Law also permits the Hong Kong government to simply promulgate the law, bypassing lawmakers altogether. While this would be hugely controversial, and may face legal challenges, constitutionally it remains an option.
After the pandemic-enforced pause, unrest has begun again in earnest in Hong Kong. The national anthem law, as well as suggestions that a traditional commemoration of the Tiananmen Square massacre on June 4 might be called off, have already fired up the opposition movement, which hardly needed any additional motivation to resume protesting.
Putting Article 23, long seen as the law that would finally spell the death of Hong Kong, back in the agenda is guaranteed to create further anger and protests, dashing any chance of a return to normality or healing of the city's yawning political divide.